Now coming back to, this is the same thing. I read you the passage there because when I read some of the Muslim accounts, in their own cultural way of expressing things, they even say more outlandish things than what I just read to you. These are the Muslim explorers who encountered these Buddhas and brought some of them back to Mecca, which I didn't know until I did some research. So at Subahar Monastery at Kabul, when the Abbasid Caliph al-Mamun went there and conquered it, he forced the king to convert to Islam, but not anyone else, and he took the large Buddha statue at Subahar and brought it back to Mecca. And it stayed in Mecca for years, where after that, who knows, they probably melted it down for something or another. But these are the kinds of words we hear. No one was forced in the general population to turn away from Buddhism, and Buddhism recovered several times after these invaders left. I'm talking about for hundreds of years at a time. And one of the most famous accounts of the Muslim contact with the Buddhist world is celebrated in Rumi's Masnavi and in other books of that period. And it concerns the conqueror Mahmud. Mahmud, who was at Ghazni in Afghanistan. And those of us who read the Masnavi, we get the impression in the Masnavi that Mahmud was the great idol breaker, and he would go into India for the sole purpose of destroying these idols. It's in many places in the Masnavi. Well, it turns out that actually he went into India to attack an Ismaili at Multan. And on the way, he saw the loot at these Buddhist monasteries, and so he did conquer them, and he took the treasures. There were temples destroyed, but on the whole, they did not prevent people from then becoming part of this dhimmi class, this protected class of people. And that is, again, as I said, is because they had not only a religion that resembled Islam in some ways to these conquerors, but they had a holy book, so they became people of the book. They were essentially the same status as Jews and Christians, say, in Spain. And there were some fanatics always. I'm afraid there are a lot of them now, but there were certainly quite a number of them even then. But they were unable to gain the upper hand. And the administrations of these different Islamic governments over the centuries allowed, for the most part, the practice of the religion of Buddhism and Zoroastrian and so forth. But accompanying Mahmud of Ghazni on these expeditions was a famous Persian historian whose name is Al-Biruni. And he spoke and wrote favorably about Buddhism. And he said that the Indians referred to Buddha as a prophet. So he introduces the idea that they claim that Buddha is a prophet. And much of the Islamic world repeats that claim, and it reinforces the idea that they are people of the book. In the Quran, by the way, you normally find out that the people of the book are Jews and Christians, but then and Sabians. But on the other hand, in the Quran there are phrases such as, and we've told you about some of the prophets, and we have not told you about others. So it's clear that there are many prophets that are not identified. So as these people ran into these different cultures across Asia, they assumed that these were the prophets being spoken about that had not been mentioned by name. And so we have, by 982 of the Common Era, so this is some 300 years after this first contact that we talked about in Sind, the Ghaznavids had already permitted the Buddhist temples to stay open because they came from Central Asia. And so in territories they already held, they already had given protection to the Buddhists. And so by 982, we have descriptions of the frescoes that are still visible at Navavihara in Balkh. And of course, the colossal Buddha figures that are at Bamyan, central Afghanistan, are basically undamaged. And they were damaged in small ways in 1989 when I was there. But I too climbed up to see the frescoes, and I thought about that a lot because I saw that the people had been shooting at the legs of the Buddha with small weapons. There were probably always some fanatics who decided they were going to try to take it down. But if they were so fanatical, why didn't they just go up and scrape the frescoes off? See, so there must have been some people there, Muslims I mean, who were protecting this. And then we see it enter, as I said, what I want to stress with you tonight is the amazing effect that the actual Buddhas had. And they enter the literature, and any modern poet, modern, let's say, from the 14th century on, the 15th century on, who is using the word Buddha in Persian, But, that later poet means a worldly sweetheart, or they mean God. They mean Allah. But in the earlier times, they mean the actual Buddha statues. And so I will move next to some evidence for that. And it happens to be in a book that I chose to translate, The Garden of Mystery, that Coral mentioned earlier. And one of the things that interested me so much about that book was that this was a time when the Mongol hordes had traveled all the way through this same lands of Islam and had destroyed many cities, but they were very careful destroyers. They would sort people out, and they would keep the religious people and the craftspeople, and they themselves had Buddhist advisors. Many of them were Buddhists. Some of them were Christian. So there's an old Christian connection to the Mongols. So you have this Mongol hordes coming in the 13th century, and by the 14th century, you have the great-grandchildren of Genghis Khan settled in Tabriz, which is in Iran, very close to the border of Turkey. And Tabriz was a kind of amazing capital, cultural capital, by Shabastari's time. And Shabastari is writing the Gulshan-e-Raz, the Garden of Mystery, in 1317. And there's repression already setting in as the mainly Buddhist Mongol Arghun and Ghazan converts to Islam at the hands of a Sufi sheikh, I should add. But by the time we get to Abu Sa'id, we now have a destruction of the Buddhist temples, killing of the Buddhist monks, the burning of the churches, the destruction of the synagogues, etc. So we see this side of the imagined religion, unable to tolerate someone else's imagined religion that we talked about earlier. And I don't know how many of you have read Max Muller, who was the great pioneer of comparative religion in the 19th century. But he said, he who knows one knows none. And what he meant was that if a person only knows their own religion and they don't have an open enough mind to consider what other religions are about, they actually will never even know what their own religion is about. Because it's precisely in learning about other religions that one could find out that there is a unity in the religions at the level that I quoted you earlier from those different sages. I mean, we restricted it to those three religions. We could have quoted from every tradition, and we would have had the same thing. And, of course, in the realm of comparative religion, one of the things that one has to encounter and be troubled by are those things that don't fit the current paradigm. So those of us who read, whether it's the Bible or the Quran, or for that matter, there are many people, I know Buddhists who are like, what, Buddhist beyond beliefs people, huh? It's like anything that has any scent of religion, organization, they absolutely are nauseated by this, you see. Well, this is a product of the imaginalized culture that we have. And there are other people. This is all storytelling. It's like, you don't like that movie? Fine. Well, here's this other movie, you know, no problem. But to study religions and to see these distinctions and to understand how they come about, understand how water gives life to different plants and is still water. This is the purpose of comparative religion. And you had an amazing movement starting in the 19th century in the United States, a very strong one. Vivekananda in Chicago, 1893. You have Indians coming to America talking about their religions, unity of religion. You have this wonderful movement coming up through the 20th century, in many ways flowering into the freedom and really appetite that we have as people for religions from other cultures. And we have people here from other cultures. And we have people from those cultures adopting Christianity, etc. But unfortunately, something happened, you know, what it was like 30 years ago, something strange started to happen, and people got conservative and closed-minded, and they weren't following Max Muller's advice. So what I want to do, though, is I want to share with you something very interesting, because I actually should document the claim I've made that the Persian poets started using the word Buddha to refer to God. And this is what drew me to translate Shabastari among 50 things. This was one of them, see. So he writes, Mahmud Shabastari, 1317, in a Mongol, an Ilkhanid, by then it's called the Ilkhans, are the descendants of the Mongols, in a civilization that is now run by the Ilkhanids. There are Buddhist monasteries, there are Indian Buddhist priests, monks in Tabriz. Churches are open, synagogues, everything active. The Muslims are having a bit of a hard time. They, after all, lost the battle. And this is the place where the Sufis are able to write what they know about. And Shabastari says, if a Muslim knew what the Buddha statue represents, he would know there is true faith in its veneration. If a Muslim knew what the Buddha statue represents, he would know there is true faith in its veneration. Musulman gar bedanisti ke but chist, bedanisti ke din dar but parastist. That's the Persian, okay?